Xtalks connects professionals in the life science, medical device, and food industries with useful content like webinars, job openings, articles, and virtual meetings to help you succeed in your career. This food industry-focused podcast brings together some of our editorial staff to share insights into the latest B2B industry news to help keep you up to date. This week on the show, we're discussing cadmium and lead in dark chocolate. And are Wegovy and Ozempic a threat to the food industry? Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Xtalks Food Podcast. I'm Sydney Perlmutter, Senior Food Industry Journalist and Webinar Moderator at Xtalks.com, and this week I'm joined by Vera Kovacevic. Thanks for coming today. So I'm going to start us off with a bit of a story that combines two things that we cover here at Xtalks, which is, life science and, of course, food, since this is the food podcast. But I know we've spoken extensively about what I'm going to talk about on the life science podcast and just on, Xtalks in general. So I'm sure you've heard of them before. We have very popular weight loss drugs, Wegovy and Ozempic. And I'll just clarify that Ozempic is approved for type 2 diabetes treatment, but is often used for off-label weight loss as well. So these two drugs continue to gain traction in the US, but a result of that is that Americans could potentially reduce their purchases of high-calorie snacks and food. So this is where, the food industry angle comes in. And while it's a little bit too early to tell at this point, this shift has the potential to profoundly transform the food industry, and it's catching the attention of investors and industry leaders. So before diving a little deeper into the potential effects on the food industry, let's just first break down these drugs a little bit. So they're classified as GLP-1 drugs, Wegovy and Ozempic. They replicate a hormone that signals fullness to the brain, pushing people, even those on diabetes medications, to consume less and opt for healthier dietary selections. Originally designed for type 2 diabetes management, many now see Wegovy and Ozempic as a breakthrough for weight loss, frequently consulting their medical practitioners. And this massive demand, which has been partly driven by social media and celebrities allegedly taking the drugs, has led to shortages. Now, the food industry has slowly but surely become aware of the potential impact of weight loss drugs. Recently, Walmart's US CEO told Bloomberg that consumers using Ozempic tend to purchase fewer groceries. And this insight was derived from Walmart's analysis of its pharmacy and grocery data. So they're sort of uniquely positioned to have this data from both, their pharmacy and their grocery side. So I thought that was really interesting. And PepsiCo also commented on this trend recently during a financial update. While the beverage and snack giant showed strong financial growth in this recent quarter, it questioned the narrative that Wegovy and Ozempic might cause a market dip. However, the typically stable PepsiCo stock has dropped by almost 13% in half a year, reflecting larger trends in the food sector. Shares of Mondelez International as well, who are responsible for products like Chips Ahoy and Oreo, have fallen nearly 11% over the past 6 months. Food giant Nestlé has seen a 15% dip in the same period and even announced plans to develop products similar to Wegovy and Ozempic amidst concerns that they could reduce food consumption and impact profitability. And like I said, while it's still too early, major food players and investors are observing this phenomenon. In a comprehensive report this summer, a group of 17 experts from Morgan Stanley discussed the potential impact of obesity medications on food demand and the possible transformation of the food landscape. The firm anticipated that over the next decade, about 7% of the U.S. population, which equates to 24 million individuals, might use drugs like Wegovy and Ozempic. And those on these medications are projected to reduce their caloric intake by roughly 20%. So by 2035, this could account for 1.3% of the total calorie consumption. So thus, if this trend continues, a rise in the adoption of these weight loss medications could decrease the demand for foods high in calories, fats, and sugars, affecting both household groceries and fast food chains. So is the success of the snack and fast food industry, though, intrinsically linked with overweight consumers? Well, with these weight loss drugs influencing stock prices, there's a risk that these companies may be perceived as unhealthy food promoters if consumers start slimming down. And if this phenomenon persists, food companies would need to reposition themselves from just being food suppliers to being partners for those on weight loss journeys in a possibly shrinking market. So as Wegovy and Ozempic and others like it become more common, factors such as regulatory challenges, adoption procedures, and costs will possibly limit their extensive use. But only time will tell, the true impact on the food industry. And nevertheless, though, it's evident that they're causing unease among food industry stakeholders and investors. So, Vera, I'm very curious to know, what you thought about this from both, just a scientific perspective, but also as a consumer of food, like the rest of us. Since we have talked about these weight loss drugs before on the life science side, had you ever really sort of linked it to its impact on the food industry, or was this sort of like a new thought that came to mind?
Yeah, Sydney, that was totally a new thought for me because I never connected it to anything in the food industry or any food industry trends. I never connected the two industries at all. But you're right that Wegovy and Ozempic are making a huge impact. We'll see their sales numbers next year, but I think it's going to be phenomenal. And actually, I was in the drug mart or the pharmacy the other day, and I was at the counter, and then I just had a look at the fridge behind them, and it was all Ozempic boxes for people to pick up. It was just filled, just Ozempic. And so I know there is very high demand for these new drugs. And I think it was an interesting analysis you brought up by companies like Walmart. You're saying that they noticed that consumers who would get those kinds of drugs, specifically, Ozempic or Wegovy, they would buy less food, was it? Or junk food in particular. So I think that's an interesting trend, but I think it's only going to be like a short-term trend. I don't see it being a long-term trend. What do you think?
Yeah, it also really depends, how long people stay on these medications too. We're only at the beginning of analysis in terms of this trend. These drugs have just started to take off. I don't know if the intent, and obviously the intent for all individuals will be different, but I don't know if people on these drugs should be on them long term, or if it's more of a short term solution, and then you start developing different habits while you're on them, and then maybe those habits last, maybe they don't. I agree though. I think it's either going to be short term, or we just won't ever be able to gather enough data to make a true correlation. Because I agree, I think the Walmart correlation was interesting, since they have, they can get these insights from their consumers. But, for the other companies I was talking about that, their stocks went down in the last 6 months, like Pepsi, not Pepsi, but Mondelez and Nestlé, those dips, we can't just attribute them to people on weight loss drugs. Obviously, there are so many other factors. And when we're dealing with all of these factors, it is hard to know for sure where they're coming from. So, I agree. It might be short-lived. And I think there's always going to be a demand for junk food and just food in general. So I wouldn't be too nervous if I was the Nestle CEO. I think they're going to be just fine. But it is interesting to sort of link them together, because I hadn't really thought about it before either.
Or maybe companies like, PepsiCo and other ones, maybe they can launch new better for you snack options or something to cater to those individuals who are on these type of medications, because I think these drugs, they're also appetite suppressants, right? Mm-hmm. So not only are people losing weight and then eating less, but they're eating less because they have less of an appetite, right?
And I think they're also like craving less of those high calorie, high sugar, high fat foods, just because it may not, like if they've tried it, it may not sit well with them while they're on these medications. So they are less inclined to want to eat them. And I think even before the, Wegovy and Ozempic trend, I think that major food companies did recognize the demand for better for you products. So I think this, with this in mind, I think they can capitalize on that even more. All right, moving on to our next story. So we've got the holiday season coming up, and that usually means that there's going to be a boost in chocolate consumption, whether it be white, milk, or dark, and it's various formats. So dark chocolate, though, it's often perceived as the healthier treat, and many are unaware, though, of the potential heavy metals that it might harbor. So last year, Consumer Reports revealed that dark chocolate could contain cadmium and lead, metals known to cause health issues. And this year, with a broader scope, Consumer Reports, or CR, offers a deeper dive into this matter and answers the question, are cadmium and lead in dark chocolate a serious concern? So we all know that cocoa is the heart and soul of chocolate, giving it its characteristic taste, but it's also where these heavy metals predominantly reside. And with dark chocolate usually having a higher cocoa content, it's more susceptible. But notably, other chocolate variations from milk chocolates with minimal cocoa to dense cocoa powder aren't exempt either. So in its pursuit of clarity, CR tested 48 different products spanning 7 categories, namely cocoa powder, chocolate chips, milk chocolate bars, dark chocolate bars, brownie mixes, chocolate cake mixes, and hot chocolate. So brands ranged from the globally recognized like Hershey's and Nestlé to retailers like Costco and Walmart, and even specialized brands such as Drost and Navitas. So the central theme, cadmium and lead in dark chocolate. And these results were somewhat expected. Dark chocolates had higher heavy metal content, particularly cadmium and lead. And while milk chocolates showed lower levels, James E. Rogers, who is the director and acting head of product safety testing at CR, pointed out that every product CR tested had detectable amounts of cadmium and lead. And though some products did cross CR's threshold for concern regarding these heavy metals, safer alternatives in each category were also identified. So they didn't just point out the bad, they pointed out some better alternatives. So cadmium, lead, and other heavy metals aren't exclusive to chocolates. They're actually pretty omnipresent in other foods like rice, fish, spinach, and even drinking water. But the danger escalates with cumulative intake from multiple sources. Particularly concerning is chocolate's popularity across age groups. So reducing its heavy metal content seems pretty imperative. And heavy metal exposure can inflict the most damage on children and during pregnancies. It can lead to developmental delays, behavioral problems, and brain damage. And adults aren't immune either. Continuous exposure to lead can cause kidney damage, reproductive issues, and more. We also have talked about in the past, especially concerning kids, that heavy metals in baby food was quite a concern, and how the FDA sort of plans to address and lower lead levels in baby food. But the presence of lead in dark chocolate isn't just an occasional risk, it's a persistent concern, given that cocoa plants absorb cadmium from soil and lead can deposit on cocoa beans from external sources. So let's talk about how CR, did their testing. So they tested for cadmium, lead, mercury, and arsenic in various chocolate products. And fortunately, none of the products indicated risks from arsenic or mercury. The primary concern revolved around cadmium and lead in dark chocolate, though. So for benchmarks, CR referred to California's maximum allowable dose levels, or MADL, for these metals, since no federal limits exist. It's crucial to note that the tests were not about legal compliance, but more about revealing products with relatively higher metal levels. So for dark chocolate enthusiasts, CR's findings showed a mixed bag of results. Out of 7 dark chocolate bars tested, 5, or 71%, surpassed CR's threshold for cadmium, lead, or both. Some safe bets were Divine 70% deliciously smooth dark chocolate and Sam's Choice dark chocolate 85% cocoa. So I think the latter of those is a store brand. And then contrarily, bars like Nestlé's Perugina premium dark chocolate posed concerns, and Nestlé's response emphasized its compliance with regulatory requirements, including those for lead and cadmium. Of course, it would go on the defense. And while chocolate remains an indulgent treat, it's crucial to be selective. The recurring theme of cadmium and lead in dark chocolate should encourage consumers to stay informed, choose wisely, and enjoy in moderation. So this was a relatively, new discovery for me. I hadn't really looked into, the health risks of dark chocolate. I, like many others, always perceive dark chocolate to be the healthier option. I think it's lower in calories, and it often has more, I think, antioxidants or offers more health benefits, I believe, than milk or white chocolate. So I had never really thought about there being risks to it, including heavy metals. But, its heart, cocoa, if it's absorbing these heavy metals from soil, that's pretty important. And then it also made me think about what other foods could potentially harbor heavy metals that I hadn't thought about before. But we'll just focus on chocolate for the time being. So Vera, is this a risk that you knew about, or was this new to you as well?
Yeah, this is totally new to me. Like, I didn't know at all that these heavy metals would be found in chocolate. But, like you said, it makes obviously more sense why they're found in higher amounts in dark chocolate, obviously because of the higher percentage of, how do you say it, cacao?
I think cocoa.
Okay.
Cacao is also a thing. I'm not sure if the two are the same things. Maybe they're just the same pronunciation, but I think cocoa.
Yeah, cocoa. Okay. Yeah, I think having maybe like 2 bites of dark chocolate a day, or maybe like a quarter of a chocolate bar, it's not going to do anything to you because you're probably under the daily maximal allowable dosage of these heavy metals. So I don't think people need to be concerned. And honestly, I don't think, I don't know many people that eat like dark chocolate on a daily basis. So, I'm sure there's plenty of people that eat chocolate on a daily basis, but like the chances of it being solely dark chocolate are probably lower. Mm-hmm. And also, it's not like you're eating like, a pound of it a day. So I think, most people don't have to worry about that. But it's interesting that, they contacted the food companies that had like really high amounts of cadmium and lead, and their response was just like, yeah, we comply with all regulations, which of course they would say that, but still, like, maybe they should think about where are they sourcing their cocoa from, and maybe that area has like higher lead and cadmium levels in the environment. So there's a lot of factors that they should consider, I think, which they probably aren't.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that, is maybe it's just concerning to hear about, and deeper down, it may not be that big of a deal, but that there are no federal regulations, and that they were just going based off of California's regulations. And to me, I was like, oh yes, of course California would have these regulations, since they're very on top of food safety and sort of vigilant about these things. But maybe, not to be a Nestlé defender or a defender of these companies, but maybe they truly are complying with regulations that are set in place, since there are no federal regulations. Like, I don't know what regulations they are following, or if they're being truthful. They may not be. So do you think it is concerning that there aren't federal regulations for this?
Yeah, certainly. I think the U.S. should have them in place. And I think, California's law is a great place for them to start. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not like they have to do that much work. They could just copy California's guidelines, literally, right? And put them in place federally.
Mm-hmm. And chocolate, or cocoa rather, is one of those products that notoriously has had issues in the public eye in terms of source and labor and just environmental factors. So it's already, under pretty strict, I guess, eyes are on it, more so than maybe other produce or other things that you have to harvest. And I guess this is just one more thing that companies need to like be more vigilant of. But yeah, it has a pretty hard, like tough history. And maybe this, like, the heavy metal factor was just one that had been ignored for a while. And you did point out too that, most people don't have to worry about this unless you're consuming it every single day and in large quantities, then maybe. But otherwise, you're probably going to be okay. I think it's just good to sort of know these things though, and just be vigilant that, it could pose a risk. And I appreciate, CR for doing all this work and testing these chocolates and also providing alternatives, that meet those thresholds. So I appreciated that they, didn't just say it's all gloomy. Like there are better options. And I thought it was interesting that the better options, or some of them were, store brand ones, the ones that tend to be like cheaper.
Yeah, that's so strange to me how like different brands have different amounts. You would think that there'd be like one kind of average amount that everybody has. But I think it really depends on the source of their cocoa then.
It must, yeah.
Yeah, probably. That's what I think. And but I wanted to ask you, Sydney, like writing and researching about this, are you going to be more hesitant to eat dark chocolate now?
It's a very good question. I'm one of those people who prefers milk chocolate. So, however, I definitely enjoy like a high quality Lindt dark chocolate bar. Those are phenomenal. However, I think I'd probably have one of those only like once a year. So just because of my personal taste, I don't need to worry about it. However, with that in mind, though, knowing that milk chocolate isn't immune from having these, any sort of lead or cadmium in it either, maybe I'll be a little bit more vigilant. But I think dark chocolate is the main concern if you consume too much of it. But yeah, I prefer milk and the lighter chocolates. So lucky me, I guess. But what about you? Do you like dark chocolate?
Yeah, actually, I do really like dark chocolate, and like, just thinking about like, a dark chocolate fudge or a dark chocolate cake. I absolutely love those. And yeah, me and my mom, we generally, if we buy chocolate, we aim for dark chocolate just because it usually has less sugar as well. So that's a reason. Like, I think a lot of people who want to lower their sugar consumption go with that option. But yeah, like I said, like we don't eat more than, like 20 grams of it, just something to put in your mouth, like a little snack. But now that I know, I'm definitely going to be a little bit more risk adverse to dark chocolate. Just because, like there's no benefit to having lead or cadmium in your diet.
No,
it's not like magnesium, where you can take magnesium supplements. This is like, there's no benefit of this. It's only detrimental. So yeah, I think I will be a little bit more aware of how much I'm having.
And I think it's just one of those lessons of, since I thought it was a healthier option, and in terms of the nutritional profile, it certainly still is, but I think it just is a good lesson in just like doing a little bit more research and diving a bit deeper into things that we perceive as healthy, similar to, saying like, just because it's like natural or naturally occurring, that means it's healthy. That's not always the case. So I think this is just a good like lesson in there's always a little bit more under the surface level that we may not know about, and we could always look into a bit more. And I think for children especially, I mean, it's more important for sure, since it can have much more detrimental impacts on kids. Hopefully there aren't too many children dark chocolate connoisseurs out there. I think it has always been more of an adult delicacy than it is for kids, since I think they tend to prefer the lighter chocolates like myself. But yeah, definitely good to note and just be aware of if you consume a lot of dark chocolate. All right, well, that's the end of this episode of the Xtalks Food Podcast. If you like today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks, everyone, and see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Xtalks Food Industry Podcast. If you enjoyed our discussions today, please share the episode with your friends and colleagues, and be sure to subscribe in order to be notified when a new episode is released. To join in on the discussion, you can find Xtalks on social media. Email podcast@xtalks.com or comment on the articles directly. Links are in the show description. Take a moment to join our community at xtalks.com to get access to everything we have to offer, including webinars, job listings, virtual meetings, articles, and more. The views and opinions expressed in the podcast are those of the speakers sharing them. They should not be taken as professional advice and do not necessarily reflect the policy or position Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.